frequently you have to figure out how you're going to re-architect your other services in order to interoperate with that. And so, you know, Box, for example, so Box is the first generally available service to come out of NetPlus. On one level, it's kind of a no-brainer. We could say, here's Box, everybody log in, use it, and it would meet a lot of needs that people have right now that are unmet. On the other hand, the next thing people are going to say is, how come Box doesn't show up in Collab? How come I can't put my Box, see my Box files in SharePoint? Why can't I drag something from Exchange, from Outlook over in Box? Why can't I open up my Word documents? You know, pretty soon, almost immediately, you bump into all of these integration questions. And so we kind of feel like we have to at least understand what those issues are and have a clear idea of which of those integration questions we're going to address right up front, and which we're going to say, yep, that's a good question, and we can't take that one on. Integration with groups, for example. Everybody's got a ton of groups. Box doesn't know our groups from a hole in the ground. And for a lot of people, that's going to be a showstopper. So we figure we at least need to have answers to those questions before we roll it out. And some services have raised more questions along those lines. Some services raise fewer questions along those lines. One of the other big considerations is whether this is a user-facing service or not. And I think something like Box is complex because it's user-facing. So we have to figure out what we're going to do about training, about support, all of those kinds of things. And people are going to call Box when they have trouble, or they're going to call the help desk. There are other things that we could adopt. For example, you know, if it turns out that disk space at Amazon is a great deal through Seating, we could start using disk space, and nobody would ever know we were doing it. We'd just start mounting cloud storage on our servers, and you see the same service you're always seeing. And that might be simpler. Some of those things I would expect to roll out more quickly. So I think your hand is up next. I think.
Thanks, Mike. What about any upgrades with connectivity, redundancy, those sorts of things? You know, you start getting these things pushed further and further out.
Yeah.
What are we going to do to address that? Because unless something has changed, when our primary links go down, we lose internet too.
Yeah, acutely aware of that. And have been, as you know, you've heard me talk about this a lot. You've heard Jim Jokel talk about it a lot. We've been working on that question for years. There are two things, I think. One thing I can safely report, and the other thing I think I can say it's more real soon now than it ever has been. That is our own fiber out of Charlottesville. I feel quite confident that we're going to succeed and have our own fiber running from here up to Northern Virginia.
So we're not talking about coming in internet to node. We're still going to be hosted out of either Richmond or Northern Virginia.
So yeah, we connect internet to in Northern Virginia. That's the nearest gigapop. What's referred to as a gigapop, right? A gigabit point of presence for those of you who aren't steeped in the terminology. And that'll continue to be the case. So Virginia Tech operates a regional aggregation point that we're a member of up in Northern Virginia. And right now, we lease a 10 gigabit per second Ethernet from Verizon that gets us from here up to Northern Virginia. And that link is unprotected, so if somebody puts a backhoe through the fiber that it runs on, we're off the air. We're going to acquire our own fiber. We've got some backup paths out of Charlottesville now, so we don't lose everything if our primary fiber goes down. And we have, just in the last month and a half or so, we've finally created a state research and education network organization for Virginia. Virginia's never had one of those. And so the 7 schools that banded together to join National Lambda Rail have now banded together to create a state R&E network. And we've got a meeting next week where we're going to start to talk about what we're going to do with that. And number 1 on the list is building an optical network for higher education, a fiber optic network that will have multiple paths and automatic failover if you lose a link and that kind of stuff. So we're working quite aggressively on those things. If you take the assets that the 7 universities who have created this new state network currently hold and put them on a map, it almost looks like a network. There are a couple of holes that need to be filled in, but we're really, really statewide fiber network that belongs to us that we can configure to meet our needs. And that's both current needs, so redundancy, availability, all that kind of stuff, but we also have a lot of pent-up needs for data-intensive research activities that we just can't do anything about right now.
I have a, so is there a cloud solution that ITS or our VPCIO office is recommending for LSPs to recommend to their users if somebody's looking for a cloud solution? Or is it still, what is the answer to that?
That's an hour-long conversation.
Okay, well.
There is no such thing as one cloud solution.
But is there one that we would recommend?
Well, what do you
based
mean by,
on this initiative?
What do you mean by a cloud solution?
So if a prof comes and wants to put stuff somewhere and they're asking about Apple versus Google versus Amazon versus Dropbox versus Box, is there a solution that a university as we're recommending?
They just want to put their files, they just want to be in the cloud someplace.
Because it's hot and it's cool, whatever.
Yeah, because it's hot and cool. No, we have nothing that's officially recommended at this point. But that will change. I'm sorry, I skipped over.
Well, I had a pretty simple question.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about support, issues in terms of adopting things from Internet 2. Those things aren't centrally decided by Internet 2. I would think, a vendor would want to say, okay, part of this deal is you provide support, provide it centrally. So that's not normally what happens?
It depends. It varies from vendor to vendor. Some of them are going to provide their own support, and some will expect us to support it.
And some would expect individual schools to make the call?
Yeah, I think a vendor that provides its own support is likely to be willing to work with us to provide a front end to that if we want to. So I don't remember what the deal is for bots. I don't remember whether they are taking phone calls or not. But let's say for the sake of argument, they're going to take phone calls. They might be just as happy to take phone calls from our help desk as from our end users, and we might choose for customer service purposes to have people call our help desk, and the help desk refers you if you've got a problem they can't solve. Right. I think the vendors would work with us. And then we get to, so in those cases, we get to make a choice. If the contract with the vendor doesn't include any support at all, then we've got to decide, are we going to roll it out without support, or are we going to roll it out and staff up for that ourselves?
I just think it would be a big potential cost for them because they would want to figure it out in advance.
Executive summary and crystal ball all wrapped into one. One or two features or services here that will hit our users first, and when do you think that might happen?
If I had to make a wild guess, and I've heard loud and clear on more than one occasion that people are excited about the capabilities that Box provides.
I'm here in Box a lot.
And a lot of folks would like to have that. So we're looking at that really, really hard. That's something that it's available right now. All we have to do is sign the contract. We've already looked at the contract, and we could sign that contract. We're ready to roll on the contracting front. We've got to figure out how to pay for it, and we've got to figure out, and I think this is input that we'd be interested in hearing from you, not today perhaps, but we ought to figure out how to do this, about how much integration is enough integration for you to turn it over to your users. Can we do without groups integration? Can we do without cloud integration? Can we roll it out as is? Is that good enough?
Sounds like it might be 2 years away.
I think depending on how many integration requirements there are, it could be 2 years away, or it could be sometime this coming academic. The other one, just my gut, it's a high priority for me because we don't have anything university-wide in this space is lecture capture. And so the desire to learn lecture capture solution looks attractive. It's one of the mainstream lecture capture solutions. They offer both software lecture capture, a client that you download and install on your computer. They also offer an appliance that you can buy and plug in if you want to, so people can choose whichever way they want to go. And I'm just waiting to see the deal. That's one where the final pricing and support issues haven't been nailed down yet. But as soon as we see that deal, I think we're going to have a serious conversation about whether that is an appropriate lecture capture
So this
solution.
sits in a classroom, and while the faculty member is doing the class to 20 students in the room. Unlimited number of people can see it.
Could watch it live, you can capture it and post it someplace for later on. We've got a lot of people who want to be able to do that. And a few schools who have already gone ahead and adopted their own solution, but they'd love to see us come up with something that's supported university.
2 or 3 years?
No, I think that's probably in the next year or two. And the other stuff is a tougher call. Like I say, a lot of these things right now, frankly, a lot of things like hosted virtual machines, hosted storage, are kind of on the line economically at this point. Whether it makes sense economically to do it or not depends on some fairly fine detail about how you're going to use it and what the performance characteristics have to be, and whether you need backup or not. So it's not an easy call on a lot of that stuff yet. If the price drops again, which I think it almost certainly will, then it might get to be an easier decision for some of those things, infrastructure as a service kinds of stuff. But right now, a lot of the infrastructure as a service it's not guaranteed to be cheaper. A lot of people assume that the cloud is cheaper, and that's not always the case. There are other advantages to consuming cloud infrastructure as a service kind of stuff, like the on-demand characteristics. You know, if you want to provision for your kind of day-to-day load and then burst into the cloud when you need more servers or more storage or whatever, sometimes that looks like a pretty good deal. You don't have to configure for peak. You can configure for your routine load. But you have to have an infrastructure that supports doing that. And a lot of ours doesn't.
Reliable.
Yeah. Well, it has to be architected for that too. Not, in a lot of our services, we can't just pick up a virtual machine that's running in the UDC and ship it off to Amazon. It's not that simple. And we'd have to actually change the way we provide the service in order to do it.
Last question.
Okay. Yeah, others are waiting.
Okay. You mentioned hosted phone service.
Hosted which service?
Phone service.
Phone, yeah.
Was that just an incidental comment, or? And we haven't seen voice over IP yet. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that changing? Is that becoming a possibility? Or?
No, we're continuing on the path that we already set ourselves on, which is an RFP, a bidding process to acquire and operate infrastructure for ourselves. That's still our plan. The Internet 2 service is coming from Astra and Level 3 is really, really interesting. And we wouldn't want to be an early adopter. And so I think what we're likely to do is go ahead and complete our RFP process and implement a new phone system based on standards. What we're talking about doing is entirely standards-based, entirely modular. And it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to do a complete rollout of that. And by then, this Internet 2 Net Plus service will either have sunk or will be swimming. And there'll be a bunch of people who've blazed the trail, and we'll take a good hard look at it. There's might have a different idea, but that's my instinct about how that's likely to play out. We are certainly not dropping what we were doing and rushing off to buy hosted telephone service on through Internet 2. Not going to do that. Other places are. Other schools, particularly smaller schools, who were at the right place in their decision cycle about going from legacy telephone to internet-based telephone. There are a bunch of schools who are going to make a jump right away. Okay.
Hit the beach, man.
Thanks,
Go.
everybody.
Thank you.